Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to D.G. Wills Books in La Jolla, California. Tonight we're honored to have noted film historian Noah Isenberg to discuss his critically acclaimed book, Billy Wilder on Assignment, Dispatches from Weimar Berlin and Interwar Vienna. Noah Isenberg, by the way, is the George Christian Centennial Professor and Chair of the Department of Radio, Television, Film at the University of Texas at Austin. He was formerly Professor of Culture and Media at the New School in New York. His books include the national bestseller, We'll Always Have Casablanca, The Life, Legend, and Afterlife of Hollywood's Most Beautiful Movie, Edgar G. Ulmer, a filmmaker at the margins, Detour, a book-length study of Ulmer's acclaimed low-budget film noir, and as editor, Weimar Cinema, an essential guide to classic films of the era. His current projects include a book on Billy Wilder's Some Like It Hot, and a short interpretive biography of Wilder for the Yale Jewish Lives series. Speaking of Some Like It Hot, it's being aired right now as we speak at the Hotel Del. How's that for a coincidence? Before Billy Wilder became the screenwriter and director of such iconic films like Sunset Boulevard, that aired on TCM just a day or two ago, and Some Like It Hot, he worked as a freelance reporter, first in Vienna, and then in Weimar, Berlin. Billy Wilder on Assignment, this book, brings together more than 50 articles translated into English for the first time that Wilder published in magazines and newspapers between 1925 and 1930. From a humorous account of Wilder's stint as a hired dancing companion in a posh Berlin hotel and his dispatches from the international film scene, to his astute profiles of writers, performers, and political figures, the collection offers fresh insights into the creative mind of one of Hollywood's most revered writer-directors. Wilder's early writings, a heady mix of cultural essays, interviewed and reviews, contain the same sparkling wit and intelligence as his later Hollywood screenplays, while also casting light into the dark corners of Vienna and Berlin between the wars. Wilde covered everything: big city sensations, jazz performances, film and theater openings, dance, photography, and all manner of mass entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Noah Isenberg.
Thank you for the very warm introduction, Dennis. That was lovely. It's always great to be here, and especially to be at D.G. Wills, where I don't know how many years ago, let me see if I can do the math, that's not my strong suit, roughly a decade ago, we did a fun event for Edgar G. Ulmer, a filmmaker at the margins, with Ariane Ulmer, with Edgar's daughter. And this is the place where I grew up, where I spent my teens. My mom, who's here, was an English teacher at Bishop's, and before that at Gompers. And I used to come to Dennis's, to D.G. Wills, when it was on La Jolla Boulevard, and then here to get books. And so it really means a great deal for me to be here and be back in La Jolla. It is a fun coincidence that tonight at the Hotel Del they're playing Some Like It Hot. I guess that's bashert, I think would be the term. That's a faded. It was, but I think that young Billy, might have used another German expression to describe the predicament that we're in, and I'm grateful to all of you for being here to listen to me. I promise not to ramble on for too long. But otherwise, you could be at the Hotel Del watching Some Like It Hot. And the German expression is, man kann nicht auf allen Hochzeiten tanzen. You can't dance at all weddings. In other words, you can't be two places at once. So here we are. You're stuck with me. It was last night, and Dennis knows this because he forwarded me the New Yorker profile of Ernst Lubitsch, who was one of Wilder's beloved mentors. And in fact, there's a reproduction of a sign that Billy kept in his Los Angeles or Beverly Hills office. What would Lubitsch do? And that was what he always, he always wanted to model himself after the great mentor, Ernst Lubitsch. And there's a piece in the current issue of the New Yorker on Ernst Lubitsch by the New Yorker music critic Alex Ross, who, again, as fate would have it, was here in La Jolla last night talking on Wagner. He did a book called Wagnerism, and so he was here at the La Jolla Music Society. I thought he might stick around an extra day and come tonight, but he couldn't. He had to get back. But the point of mentioning Wagner, and then I'm going to cut to the book and talk a bit about that and give you an idea of some of the different pieces, is that Billy Wilder went with his wife Audrey to Lincoln Center for the Ring, and the concert began at 8 o'clock, and Billy says that 3 hours later he looked at his watch and it was 8:15. And so I'm hoping that I don't replicate that experience for you tonight. But that's my Wagner reference. So I'm gonna read just a little bit. You know, I'm not a poet or a novelist, and so when I do these kinds of things, I don't read maybe quite as much as a poet or novelist might do. But I do want to read just a bit from the introduction, and then I'm going to rely very heavily on the brilliant, and I can say this because it wasn't my work, it was her work, but the brilliant work of the translator Shelley Frisch, who made these texts finally available to an Anglo-American audience. When I was at Berkeley in the 1990s as a graduate student, I stumbled upon this volume called De Prins van Wales geht auf Urlaub, The Prince of Wales Goes on Holiday, which was a collection of Wilder's Berlin writings. And I, having spent many years in Germany and having facility with the German language, thought, why are these not available to everyone else? I felt almost guilty that I had access to these writings, and it took until now to make them available to an Anglophone audience. And in the meantime, I'm really delighted to say, and hopefully this won't come across as too much of a boast, not only did Tom Stoppard select it as the best book of 2021 for the Times Literary Supplement, so I'm very honored by that, but it's also appeared in the meantime in Spanish, in Italian, and in Portuguese translations. So it's very exciting that Billy, and I have a very minor hand. This is all Billy Wilder, not me so much, but I feel gratified to know that these writings are now finally reaching an audience across the globe. So I'm going to read just a little bit from the intro, and then I'm going to read from some of the text, and then I'm happy to field some questions. I kind of wish we were at the Hotel Del watching Some Like It Hot, but I hope you don't feel that way. So no buyer's remorse, I hope. Long before the award-winning Hollywood screenwriter and director Billy Wilder spelled his name with a Y in faithful adherence to the ways of his adopted homeland, he was known and widely published as Billy, that's Billie, Wilder, or Billy Wilder, actually, would have been the way that it was pronounced. At birth on June 22nd, 1906, in a small Galician town called Sucha, roughly 25 miles southwest of Krakow, he was given the name Samuel in memory of his maternal grandfather. His mother, Eugenia, however, preferred the name Billy. She had already taken to calling her first son, Wilhelm, 2 years Billy Sr., Willy. And so you had Willy and Billy. Those were the boys. As a young girl, Genia had crossed the Atlantic and lived in New York City for several years with a jeweler uncle in his Madison Avenue apartment. At some point during that formative stay, he caught a performance of Buffalo Bill's Wild West touring show. The story goes that she saw it at Madison Square Garden. I have not corroborated that, but I'm sticking to that story for now. And her affection for the exotic name stuck, even without the Y, as did her intense, infectious love for all things American. Billy was her American boy, insists Ed Sikoff in On Sunset Boulevard, his definitive biography of the internationally acclaimed writer-director. Wilder spent his first years of his life in Krakow, where his father, the Galician-born Max, who was born Hirsch Mendel, had started his career in the restaurant world as a waiter, and then, after Billy's birth, as the manager of a small chain of railway cafes on the Vienna to Lemberg line. When his gambit lost steam, Max opened a hotel and restaurant known as Hotel City in the heart of Krakow, not far from the Wawel castle. A hyperactive child known for flitting about with bursts of speed and energy, Billy was prone to troublemaking. He developed an early habit of swiping tips left on the tables at his father's hotel restaurant and of snookering unsuspecting guests at the pool table. After all, he was the rightful bearer of a name that conjures up in both German and English, a devilish assortment of idiomatic expressions suggestive of a feral beast, a wild man, even a lunatic. Long before Billy Wilder was Billy Wilder, his second wife Audrey once remarked, he behaved like Billy Wilder. The Wilder family soon moved to Vienna, where assimilated Jews of their ilk could better pursue their dream of upward mobility. They lived in an apartment in the city's first district, the hub of culture and commerce, just across the Danube from the Leopoldstadt. That's the second district, the neighborhood known for its unusually high concentration of recently arrived Jews from Galicia and other regions of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. When the monarchy collapsed after the First World War, the Wilders were considered to be subjects of Poland, and despite repeated efforts, were unable to attain Austrian citizenship. Billy attended secondary school, so through gymnasium, through high school, in the city's 8th district, the so-called Josefstadt, but his focus was often elsewhere. Across the street from his school was a tawdry hotel by the hour called the Stadion. He liked to watch for hours on end as patrons went in and out, trying to imagine the kinds of human transactions taking place inside. He also spent long hours in the dark catching matinees at the Urania, the Rothenburg Kino, and other cherished Viennese movie houses. Any chance to take in a picture show, to watch a boxing match, or land a seat at a card game was a welcome chance for young Billy. Although Wilder père had other plans for his son, a respectable, stable career in the law, an exalted path for good Jewish boys of interwar Vienna, Billy was drawn almost habitually to the seductive world of urban and popular culture, and to the stories generated and told from within it. I just fought with my father to become a lawyer, he recounted for filmmaker Cameron Crowe in conversations with Wilder. And I continue now with that same quote. That I didn't want to do, and I saved myself by having become a newspaper man, a reporter, and very badly paid. As he explains a bit further in the same interview, I quote again from the conversations with Wilder, with Cameron Crowe, I started out with crossword puzzles, and I signed them, end quote. Toward the end of his life, after having racked up 6 Academy Awards, Wilder told his German biographer that it wasn't so much the awards he was most proud of, but rather that his name had appeared twice in the New York Times crossword puzzle, once 17 across and once 21 down. In the weeks leading up to Christmas 1924, a mere 18 years old and fresh out of gymnasium, out of high school, with a diploma in hand, Billy wrote to the editorial staff at Die Bühne, the stage, one of the 2 local tabloids that were part of the media empire belonging to a shifty Hungarian emigre named Emre Bekesi, to ask how he might go about becoming a journalist, maybe even a foreign correspondent. Somewhat naively, he thought this could be his ticket to America. He received an answer, not the one he was hoping for, explaining that without complete command of English, he wouldn't stand a chance. Never one to give up, Billy paid a visit to the office one day early in the new year, and exploiting his outsized gift of gab, managed to talk his way in. In subsequent interviews, he liked to tell how he landed his first job at Die Bühne, at the tabloid, by walking in on the paper's chief theater critic, a certain Herr Dr. Liebstöckel, having sex with his secretary one Saturday afternoon. You're lucky I was working overtime today, he purportedly told Billy. It's not hard to think of the cast of characters that emerge from the pages of his later screenplays. The sex-starved men in his American directorial debut, The Major and the Minor, or in Love in the Afternoon, or The Apartment, and one could go on and on and on. Herr Liebstöckel obviously played a very formative role for young Billy. Soon he was schmoozing with journalists, poets, actors, and theater people who trained with Max Reinhardt, and the coffeehouse wits who gathered at Vienna's Café Herrenhof. There he met writers Alfred Polgar and Josef Roth, a young Hungarian actor by the name of Laszlo Löwenstein, later known to the world as Peter Lorre, rolls off the tongue a little bit better than Laszlo Löwenstein, and the critic and aphorist Anton Kuh. Billy is by profession a keeper of alibis, observed Kuh. Kuh was one of the many coffeehouse wits. Observed Kuh with a good bit of sarcasm. Wherever something is going on, he has an alibi. He was born into the world with an alibi, according to which Billy wasn't even present when it occurred. All right, I'm going to just read this last paragraph, and then I'm going to give you a couple examples from the early writings of Billy. Again, starting out his career at the tender age of 20, and making his way from Vienna, where he contributed to the 2 leading tabloids, Die Bühne and Die Stunde, so the stage and the hour, and then following the great jazz band leader, the great jazz orchestra leader Paul Whiteman, His band came on the European on the Vienna leg of the European tour, and Billy and I'm going to read you just a very small section from the performance in Berlin. But Billy attended that performance, got to know him, and again the gift of gab, his ability to sort of schmooze. He didn't know much English, and but managed to talk his way into following the band to Berlin, where he would hang his hat for the next 7 years. And it's funny, the conversations with Cameron Crowe, you can almost think of the movie Almost Famous, right? And the young aspiring rock journalist who follows this band, Clearwater, I think they're called in the movie. And Billy Wilder did something similar with Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, where he followed them, became something of a press agent, learned how to mix a martini, and ended up writing then for a number of the Berlin-based newspapers and magazines, as Dennis mentioned at the outset. I'm going to read just one more paragraph, and then we're going to cut to some of Billy's writings. The Viennese scene at the time was anything but dull, and Billy bore witness, alibi or no alibi, to the contemporary debates, sex, and violence that occurred in his midst. He carried with him a visiting card with his name Billy S. Wilder emblazed upon it, and underneath it the name of the other Bekessi tabloid, Die Stunde, to which he contributed crossword puzzles, short features, movie reviews, mainly capsule reviews, so short movie reviews, and profiles. Around the time he was filing his freelance pieces at a rapid clip, a fiery feud was taking place between Bekessi and Karl Kraus, the acid-tongued Don of Viennese letters, editor and founder of Die Fackel, the Torch, which is a very, very influential publication that Karl Kraus founded and edited, who was determined, this is Karl Kraus now, who was determined to drive the Hungarian scoundrel out of the city and banish him once and for all from the world of journalism. To add to this volatile climate, just months after Billy began working for the tabloid, one of Die Stunde's most famous writers, the Viennese novelist Hugo Bettauer, author of a best-selling novel, Die Stadt ohne Juden, The City Without Jews, was gunned down by a proto-Nazi thug. It's not exactly a happy place to end, but I'm going to end there anyway. I did mention Peter Lorre, or Laszlo Löwenstein as he was called, but I'll just cut ahead a bit and then return to some of these pieces. I'm going to return to the other one that you mentioned, Dennis, that's probably the most famous. It's the piece that opens the collection when he worked as what in English we called for a while at least a taxi dancer, a dancer for hire, an Eintänzer, at this posh Berlin hotel dancing with women. I'm going to read a short section from there. But what I want to say, and this maybe dovetails a little bit with his, he called himself a gigolo late in life, but I don't know, maybe he was stretching the truth just a tad. But an Eintänzer, a dancer for hire. When Billy arrived in Hollywood in 1934, having spent roughly a year in Paris at the Hotel Ansonia, where a number of refugees were holed up, including Peter Lorre, he lived with him there, and then when they arrived in Hollywood, at the Chateau Marmont, they were said to have shared the antechamber to the women's restroom. They were roomies then, and then continued to room together. So I just want any chance to get Peter Lorre into the conversation, I have to seize it. So there you have it. There are many, many more Peter Lorre stories that I can tell later. So I'm gonna now, if I may, I'm gonna just read a short bit from Waiter, a Dancer, Please. Herr Ober, ein Tänzer, bitte. This is a piece that was published over 4 weeks. It was serialized in the Berliner Zeitung am Mittag, and then also, ever the opportunist, Billy then, he got a little bit of recycling, I guess, at the time, very, very clever. He then also managed to publish it back in Vienna as well, so it was published both places. I think he collected in both instances. Very poorly paid as a journalist, as he says, but he was certainly, nothing if not persistent, nothing if not industrious. I'm going to read just a short section from this piece. Waiter, a Dancer, Please. It is incredible how mean people can get. A waiter informs me table 87 wishes to have a dancer. Fine, I go there. But not to table 87 because I misunderstand the number. I go to table 86. Sitting at this table are a burly young man and a bulbous-nosed lady with a tangerine-colored gown that comes down to her ankles. I make my obligatory bow in front of the couple and recite my set phrase as I face the gentleman. May I be permitted to dance with a lady? The man turns bright red in an instant, and his dueling scars stand out like white crisscrosses. His bellowing makes all the guests in the room jump up to their seats. I will permit nothing of the sort. How dare you indulge in this boorish behavior? How do you figure you can harass this lady? You nobody. I can't think of absolutely anything to say in response. Dozens of curious people are now assembled around the table. I finally stammer. I beg your pardon, but I am the house dancer, and I was sent for her. Is that so? The man shouts back, foaming and trembling with fury. What are you? We know these kinds of excuses. Herr Isen is already behind me. This is the manager. Is already behind me, profusely begging forgiveness for my behavior. The customer is always right. So I'm going to read from a couple more pieces, one of which I think actually is hauntingly apt today. And in a way, Dennis, it even returns to one of the topics that we were talking about before tonight's gathering. The piece is called The Art of Little Ruses. I don't want to come right out and insist that starting this very day, schools teach the art of lying, by which I mean using postures and facial expressions, gestures and inflections of the voice to convey the opposite of truth with sweeping powers of persuasion and achieve smashing success. I don't mean to demand it explicitly in the framework of pushing the latest educational form, for I, too, am ensnared in a curiously outdated set of ideas, and I appreciate and honor the so-called truth. But I can easily imagine that in 2 or 3 decades, lies will be regarded as an indispensable and hence utterly unobjectionable implement in our daily lives, and their correct and appropriate use could be learned systematically by employing the scientific method. The lie as mandatory school subject, accessible to everyone and anyone, a matter entailing assiduous effort and tireless aspiration, would no longer be the privilege of the few who have a natural predisposition in this arena. That, I think, would be the consummate moral and social justification of this hitherto maligned resource on a strictly democratic basis. This would seem to provide a path for the art of modern education, which for some mysterious reason has always been overlooked. Hasn't it ever occurred to you that an irresponsible waste of life? What a scholarly peculiarity it is that in light of today's challenges, the schools, even the most progressive ones, still fail to include a practical life skills subject in the curriculum. That everyone who in their earliest childhood has already mastered the square root of 2, Marriott and Gay-Lussac's law, and the years of St. Gregory and the Great's papacy, has to employ their own mental powers in his 40th year of life to figure out what tools, dialectical methods, minor judgments, and ruses he needs to argue with his wife, or something of that sort, and it takes him countless attempts to get there. You, young friend and author of an important sociological treatise, approach an influential patron. You enter his study feeling sure of your significance, the lofty worth of your pursuit, the excellence of your achievement. But lo and behold, your posturing is reduced to a low level of groveling. Your rapid breathing robs your voice of the proper intonation and the requisite chest resonance. Your gestures are feeble and unconvincing. In short, you're simply not in a position to present yourself, to breathe life incredibly into your presentation. You're fascinated and riveted by the superb sweeping motion with which your impressive destiny reaches for the needed mouthpiece. And in an ensuing pause, you lose your train of thought to analytical ideas about the nature of this greatness instead of keeping your own machinery in order. Nervousness? No, my friend. Ignorance, obliviousness. You simply ought to have learned it. Where? That's the problem. And he goes on to state, I mean, this in a way is kind of, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Oscar Wilde's On the Decay of Lying, but in a way this is kind of his rendition, advocating in the same sort of cheekiness or satirical vein as Wilde does several decades earlier, the need for mendacity, the need for lying, and how far you can get in life if you just master the art of lying. Fake news. All right, so here we go. I want to read just two more short pieces. I promised that I'd get to Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, and I also promised to be brief. I hope to stay true to both of those promises. Once you be careful not to make too many promises when you're doing something like this, but those are the two. So I'm going to get to Paul Whiteman and his performance at the Große Schauspielhaus in Berlin. It's a beautiful little piece, and I'm going to read from that. And I'm going to be brief. I try to be brief. This is an occupational hazard of a professor, I assure you. They should send us to like a 12-step program or something afterwards. I am going to be brief. But I'm going to get to this first piece that is in the Tiller Girls. This is a Manchester-based all-girl dance troupe. One of the things that's remarkable about this little collection, I'm very proud of and excited again to bring to an Anglophone audience, is that so many of these little pieces have the germs of later films. And since we were talking about Some Like It Hot, and I'm writing this cultural history of the film and study of the great American sex comedy, I have to mention it once more here. But the Tiller Girls, Manchester-based all-girl dance troupe, they arrive in Vienna at the Vienna's Westbahnhof. And who's assigned to do the piece on the Tiller Girls but young Billy Wilder? And so I'm going to read just a little bit from this piece. It's called Die Tiller Girls sind da. The Tiller Girls are here. They arrived this morning at the Westbahnhof. So this morning, 34 of the most enticing legs emerged from the Berlin Express train when it arrived at the Westbahnhof station. The charming ladies to whom they belonged had stylish traveling outfits on, and one of the least to leave the sleeping car was a tall, elegant lady of a certain age, an old-fashioned hat atop her somewhat flattened head, a lorgnette in her right hand, whirling her left hand in the air in the style of a musical conductor. Someone wanted to know. A girls' boarding school, certainly. Ha ha, April 2nd. There are the Tiller Girls, the charming Lawrence Tiller Girls from Manchester. Everyone is chirpy, busily squealing and giggling. You don't know where to look first. 16 magnificent girls gathered together, cultivated in all parts of the world. Those figures, those legs, those little faces, and well-bred to boot. Aristocratic, you might say. Miss Harley, such is the name of the shepherdess of these little sheep. And you could think of Joan Shawley, I guess, at this point. This would be a good time to think of Joan Shawley in her role of the Sweet Sue and the Society Syncopators in Some Like It Hot. But Miss Harley is directing the operations, and everything works perfectly. The suitcase, the passports, everything is fine. The girls stand at attention in rank and file, awaiting Miss Harley's sharp commands. All around is the reception committee of curiosity seekers. An interview will have to be conducted. 16 girls, 16 questions, and off we go. Blonde Winnie is up first. Have you ever been to Vienna before? Vienna? No, but the Prater, I suppose, should be very, very beautiful. Wilder goes on to interview these young visitors from Manchester, England, in a very, very amusing, as you might imagine, and entertaining way. What I want to do, rather than reading the rest, since I promised to be brief, is to point once more to this germ for the scene when Marilyn Monroe, I almost said Marlene Dietrich, when Marilyn Monroe will saunter down the train platform at the Chicago station to board the train when Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, for the first time in drag, coached by the Texas-born drag artist Barbette, who was came to Vienna in 1926 when young Billy was filing his first pieces in the tabloid press. Performed there. There's a lovely photograph of her that I got at the Harry Ransom Center that was a studio in Vienna, and then performed even later in the 20s when Billy's writing for the Berliner Zeitung am Mittag and the Berliner Illustrierte and a bunch of other places, performed there. Wilder knew her from these performances, brought her in to coach Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis in the art of drag performance. At any rate, in this piece, you get a sense not only of Wilder's attraction to these Tiller Girls, and they were famous. Siegfried Krakauer, a sociologist who also was a great film critic, famous for, among other things, a book that he wrote on these shores after fleeing the Nazis called From Caligari to Hitler, his history of German cinema between the wars. He wrote about the Tiller Girls. People were just absolutely enraptured with the Tiller Girls. So unsurprising there. What is surprising, though, I think, is to see these early writings and to look at how Billy developed as a screenwriter once he crossed the Atlantic in 1934 and began working first at Columbia and then a long-term contract at Paramount, later United Artists, the Mirisch Company, and so forth. Back to jazz, though, if I can, and then we'll open things up. Here's Whiteman's performance in Berlin. So this is after Billy met him in Vienna, somehow cajoles him to tagging along for the Berlin leg of his European tour. And then he writes this piece. Again, he's serving as something of a press agent / tour guide. And he writes this piece in Berlin, June 27, 1926. A special report that he filed back in Vienna for Die Stunde. It's called Whiteman Triumphs in Berlin. Audience of 4,000 at the premiere at the Große Schauspielhaus, which is one of the great performance spaces of Weimar, Berlin. The concert begins on Saturday evening at 8:15. Berlin, musical and artistic Berlin, is in a state of feverish excitement. The Große Schauspielhaus is sold out, right down to the last seat. Paul Whiteman, Dr. Robert Kratscher, and I head off to it. The clock on Potsdamer Platz reads 10 minutes after 8. The cars are backed up all the way to the Brandenburger Gate and the Schiffbauerdamm. The traffic moves only in fits and starts. There are 800 cars standing there. All of Berlin has gathered together. Berlin is dressed to the nines. We have to get out 100 steps before the theater, or it would take too long. The people have recognized Whiteman. After all, his picture is hanging on all the advertising pillars. People are cheering for him before they've heard even a sound. 3,500 people go into the Schauspielhaus, and 4,000 are inside. Folding chairs are set up. 2 armchairs, seat 3. 8 to 10 people are standing in the box section. About 500 have finagled their way in. Out on the streets, cars continue to drive up. People are already offering 200 marks. That is 340 shillings for a single ticket. The luminaries include Prince Joachim of Prussia, officials from the American, French, and British embassies, the editor-in-chief of the Berliner Tageblatt, Theodor Wolff, the editor-in-chief of the Vossische Zeitung, Georg Bernhardt, the top music critics from all of Berlin papers, the director of the Berlin Theater are currently in Berlin, Emil Jannings and his wife, Fritz Kreisler and his wife, all the musicians available in Berlin, etc., etc. At 8:45, 29 stylish Americans, all in tuxes, take to the podium and get to work on their instruments. Sudden silence. Whiteman gracefully prances onto the stage. Applause. Whiteman thanks the audience with a grin, his little mustache twitching. He then reaches for the baton. The room grows dark, a violet spotlight casting ambient light over the orchestra. A call for quiet comes. It's beginning. The first piece, Mississippi, naturalistic music. We hear the burble of water while experiencing the fabulous Mardi Gras celebrations in the river city of New Orleans. A musical piece of great interest. Then come 5 American melodies. Whiteman is now conducting without a baton. His body vibrates. His double chin shudders. His mustache leaps. His knees quiver. Rhythms personified. Tiger, a ragtime piece. Dizzy fingers. A frenetic chase comes across the scales. Caprice viennoise. Chrysler's violin opus transformed into jazz. 30 men are extraordinary musicians, extraordinary actors. Right in the middle of the performing a musical number, they launch into a delightful comedy. The saxophone player flirts with a lady in the box seat, while Whiteman looks daggers at him. The drummer falls asleep. The banjo player holds monologues. A musical joke is orchestrated. The concert hall grows so dark that people can't see their programs. Whiteman keeps his boys in line with a flashlight, one after the other. They are all for one and one for all, first-class acts with in the first-class music hall. As the violinist plays, he twirls his fiddle in the air, scratches his neck with the bow, then clamps it between his knees and fiddles away at the violin with the violin in position. One of them plays on a simple tire pump. 3 men sing Castles in the Air. Suddenly, the beam of light from Whiteman's flashlight lands on a corner where the musicians, who are idle at the moment, are drinking alcohol. The bottle is hidden. A guilty-looking musician scrambles to put on his most innocent face, as though we're not doing. As though there we go. It were not he doing the drinking, but the cello. I kind of botched that joke. I'm sorry for that. Brilliant comedians, brilliant musicians. The piano virtuoso is a sensation in his own right. his name is Perella. And once he goes up onto the concert stage alone, his name will have a marvelous ring to it. Kratcher's Madonna, Joseph Padilla's Valencia, both arranged by white men, all are received enthusiastically. The audience goes crazy, and Madonna, which is superbly orchestrated, can barely be recognized. It starts like a bar carol and ends with the Charleston that sets your legs a-twitter. The Rhapsody in Blue, a composition that created quite a stir over in the States, is an experiment in exploiting the rhythm of American folk music. When Whiteman plays it, it is a great piece of artistry. He has to do encores again and again. The normally standoffish people of Berlin are singing his praises. People stay on in the theater half an hour after the concert. For jazz, against jazz. The most modern of all music, kitsch, art, necessity, an essential regeneration of Europe's calcified blood. I end on that. Thank you very much. You get a sense of what Billy was in terms of a jazz fanatic, and of course by setting Some Like It Hot in 1929. It's Berlin. It's not. It's Chicago, but may as well be Berlin, as Mark Twain famously dubbed it, Chicago on the Spray. You get that jazz age euphoria and that sense of erotic attraction to the music, to the big city life, to the pulsating city, all the things that attracted young Billy to begin to write as a cub reporter and journalist in 1920s Vienna and Berlin. Anyway, thank you. I'm happy to field questions. Yeah, please.
Question.
Yes, absolutely.
On the subject of music, how did the clever young Billy with a soiled tuxedo manage to survive with an empty violin case?
That's a very, very good question. He loved jazz, that's for sure, but he was not a musician. This is almost, I'm gonna answer with Claude Rains from Casablanca when they're searching for the letters of transit. He says, serves me right, should have been more musicals, what he says to me, that they're hidden in the piano. Billy, too, was not a musician. He was drawn to the scene. That empty violin case when he's in Monte Carlo, I think it is, exactly, with the Count and again, using the gift of gab to rise from being just a poor stringer, a pauper, as it were, to a freelance screenplay writer. It's not exactly the meteoric rise that we see once he crosses the Atlantic, but it's a pretty spectacular career arc. And some of it was just getting to travel and to go and rub shoulders with the Prince of Wales, who's needed some dental work, according to Billy, and to interview some of the great people of stage and screen, to write a profile on Erich von Stroheim, whom he would then later, of course, cast in Sunset Boulevard, and even before that in Five Grays to Cairo, a lesser-known film of Wilder's. He dubs him, the man we love to hate, right? In his profile of Erich von Stroheim. In the same profile, he refers to Queen Kelly, the silent picture with Gloria Swanson, for which he will pay, so the story goes, and I'm printing the legend on this one, $1,000 that Paramount pays in order to get the rights so that they can show that flickering screen in Sunset Boulevard when Gloria Swanson with Bill Holden are doing a little home movies. And Holden is very much the sort of the taxi dancer. Different kind of taxi dancing, I guess, at that point, but is very much the gigolo who is sort of dancing with the former great, I should say, not late, but former great silent star diva, Norma Desmond. It was very much of kind of a play on early Gloria Swanson. She was nowhere near, as I think I mentioned to you when we were just chatting, nowhere near as old as she's meant to be in that picture in Sunset Boulevard. But boy, does she pull it off! One of the great performances. But the point in referencing Queen Kelly, this early silent picture that Stroh, as he was known affectionately, directed, that Erich von Stroheim directed, is that in Sunset Boulevard, one of the greatest and most scathing meditations on Hollywood is that Wilder, we speak in the world of literature. My mom would know this better than I do, but of a roman à clé, right? That you're writing sort of a slightly veiled a fiction, and in Sunset Boulevard too, he's working in all of these strands of experience. You write what you know, and he's working all these different strands of experience into that film, a film that definitely looks back, obviously, on the old Hollywood. You've got Cecil B. DeMille in the picture, of course. You've got Buster Keaton in the picture. You've got Hedda Hopper, who was writing, of course, on the in her own tabloids, not Billy's tabloids, but filing her own pieces on Tinseltown and on the industry. All of that in a movie like Sunset Boulevard, which is a great double feature, by the way, I think, with Mulholland Drive. Either that or with The Player, depending if you're more of a fan of Lynch or Altman. But anyway, we can program our next series at the Lot, maybe, if we're lucky. Please.
Reading, like, how much is Vienna, the experience of Vienna, which is a very different place at this point, right, than Berlin?
For sure.
How much is that shaping what he's seeing, or how he's structuring what he's seeing in Berlin?
It's a very good question, and I think you answer part of it already yourself, in the sense that Billy Wilder had experienced forms of virulent anti-Semitism before he left to Berlin, which is a much more cosmopolitan city, much more open city, more receptive to kind of libertine ways, and Vienna had some of that as well, but Berlin was a much larger city, more international city. But even when he was there, and so before he left soon after the burning of the Reichstag, but an approximately year or so before, he witnessed a brutal, violent act that was. I can't remember exactly where in the city it was. I don't think it was terribly far from the west, from Kurfürstendamm, but regardless, he sees Nazi thugs attack an Orthodox man, and he knows that this is not going to end well, as much as anyone could know. And he leaves after the burning of the Reichstag. He leaves for Paris, and doesn't really look back. It's not in the Dick Cavett interview, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's in another interview where late in life, he says there are optimists and there were pessimists. He says the optimists died in the gas chambers. The pessimists have swimming pools in their backyards in Beverly Hills, and it's very, very dark gallows humor. But it's very Wilder, who lost his mother, his stepfather, and his grandmother in the death camps, and who in 1945 returned to Berlin in service uniform to work with the Czech-born filmmaker Hanuš Burger in a film called Todesmühlen, Death Mills, which was very much really a kind of a didactic. It's about re-educating Germany after the war, and it's a brutal film that was being shown to people to make sure that they couldn't possibly deny what had occurred in their backyard. He was in a supervisory capacity, was involved in the production. He was not the director, and this was not Wilder's style. So after that experience, very, very soon after, he shoots on location in Berlin A Foreign Affair with, Marlene Dietrich almost came out of my mouth when I wanted to say Marilyn Monroe.
So it's 45, right?
No. So Todesmühlen is in late 45. He goes back to Berlin. He begins to do location shooting for Foreign Affair, which is released in 48. But soon after, the experience that he has working with Hanuš Burger on Todesmühlen. And again, this is Wilder believes that he can be most effective, and this he shares with Fred Zinnemann, who worked with together. They kind of had their big debut, and this links us to Ulmer too, who co-directed it with Robert Siodmak. But Menschen am Sonntag in 1929 was really there. That's the film where Fred Zinnemann, Wilder on script, which meant that he jotted down some ideas on cocktail napkins at the Romanisches Café on Kurfürstendamm. But both of them were very much aligned in entertainment, that what they were doing was entertainment. Movies should be like amusement rides or whatever, is one another something that the Wilder late life. And Zinnemann was very much of this view. And so what he does with The Foreign Affair, rather than grab a hold of someone by the neck and kind of rub their nose in what had occurred in the backyard, which is essentially what Todesmuller is an important film, but not Wilder. What he does in A Foreign Affair is to show how, and he does this, by the way, a bit later in 1, 2, 3, but he shows how we are not all, we're not guilt-free, and that we too are complicit. He shows the American servicemen who are taking full advantage of the black market, and he shows in the character of Erika von Schlütau, who's played by Marlene Dietrich, somebody who, like I mentioned before, Claude Rains as Captain Renault in Casablanca, whichever the prevailing wind happens to be, as Renault says in Casablanca, he's fine. So if the prevailing wind is from Vichy, he goes that way. And Erika von Schlütau is very much the political opportunist. And Wilder entertains a mass audience with stories like this, and does so again in with Coca-Cola capitalism in 1, 2, 3. And so I think that Wilder is a fascinating figure within this larger group of emigres in Hollywood, in the sense that he becomes so quintessentially American, right? He's naturalized in, I think it's 41, I can't remember the precise date off the top of my head. And yet he never, ever leaves behind these European roots. And unlike Ulmer and Fritz Lang and Robert Siodmak and others, he did not return to Europe. He did not forgive, and he did not forget, and he never did. I should say, did not return to Europe and try his hand in the German film industry. He did late in life, when Hollywood when they were not providing the funding that he needed for his film. He did actually collect German funds. In one of his very late films, which was then fictionalized in a lovely book by Jonathan Coe called Mr. Wilder and Me, that has now just been published by Europa Editions here on these shores. But he did for and of course I'm blanking on the title of that film, but he did for that picture take the German money, and he was very, in a typical Wilder, like the the pessimist and optimist remark. He said, if the film bombs, then it's revenge for what occurred, and if it does well, then I can snub Hollywood with it. So that was the way that he rationalized that film. Please.
I was a little curious. Did Dennis say that you were at the University of Texas, chair of the radio, television, film?
Guilty as charged.
Yeah. How does that work out for you?
So I moved there from the New School in New York City, where I had the pleasure of establishing a small film program that was a mix of production, so people who were screenwriters, cinematographers, directors, as well as eggheads like me, film historians and scholars. And so I had that experience when I was tapped to take on this position, which is, there is that old adage, everything is bigger in Texas, and they're not kidding. It was by a factor of 10. But the composition of the department is very similar to the one that I established in New York City in the New School, which was, again, a blend of production as well as scholarship. So film history, film theory, film criticism, as well as people who do work in cinematography and screenwriting, in sound, so work in editing and sound post-production, and it's been a great experience so far. I've been chair now for 4 years. I'm ready to step down.
Who do you think of, wouldn't be just one person, that corresponds to maybe the thematic genius, if that's the word, of Wilder now in Hollywood, who you kind of like? But kind of like you can see they had a seed in his Wilder. Then the other thing is, Texas cinema is sort of, and TV is sort of sneaking up on America.
Yeah.
Hollywood's noticing because none of the coastal things are doing as well as Yellowstone, 1883 and all that. Tyler Sheridan's, Wind River, and before that, Hell and High Water.
That's a good question. I mean, I'd love to see, and Professor McConaughey in my department has been lobbying with the the Texan legislators to bring more production to Texas, but you know what you need for that always is tax incentives. So that's why we're shooting up in British Columbia or in Georgia or in other states where they're offering better tax incentives. But there's definitely a great deal of creativity in the state, and this goes back. I mean, Terrence Malick is obviously one of the great pioneers from the region, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know him over the years, and I admire his work. Richard Linklater is really one of the great filmmakers of our generation, and extremely versatile as well, and very, very devoted to film in the state. He is the founder of the Austin Film Society. And is extremely. We were there they were doing a little after Bogdanovich's passing. They did a small series, and a musical that's far less known of Bogdanovich called "A Long Last Love." We went and attended, and Rick Linklater's up there, till the lights go off in the entire place. I mean, he's happy to talk with everybody, to do a Q&A with Lars Nilsson, who's one of the programmers there. So very, very active in promoting film culture there, and film and media culture, I guess you should say, continues to thrive. And the reason I want to say media culture is because the gaming industry has also found a real strong hold in Austin, and a lot of our students in radio, television, film, which sounds like a somewhat we decided we had a retreat after I arrived in January of 2019. And there was all this back and forth. Do we need a sort of more forward-looking name? And thankfully, I say thankfully, even though I was on the fence for a while, RTF, or radio television, as anachronistic as it may seem, it's endearing, and it also has a kind of, and no matter what we would come up with now, 10 years from now, that would then be, we could call it so the department that I founded at the New School was called, because I had these Australian colleagues who use this term much more than we do here on these shores, and I lost the argument, but we called it screen studies, which sounds like you study your cell phone or something. So I tried very hard. No, we can't do that. How about I don't know, cinema studies or something? Anyway, but the media piece is becoming increasingly important, and the tech industry, for better or for worse, in Austin has really, really brought a lot of capital to the city. And so a lot of the people who are in gaming, in the gaming industry, among other industries, a number of post houses also are based in Austin. And Robert Rodriguez has his studio is there. There's a studio that's now being built, enormous studio in Bastrop. Back to your first question, though, if I may. It's very, very difficult for me to speculate who that rightful heir of the Wilder estate would be, so to speak. Who is it who's carrying the mantle? There are, I think, a scarcity of comedies in the Wilder vein. We try hard. We do these rom-coms, but they're not the same as the great screwballs of the 30s. When Wilder got his start, furnishing screwball scripts to Lubitsch, such as Bluebeard's Eighth Wife and Ninochka. And then did his own screwball. His directorial debut was the great screwball with Ginger Rogers and Ray Milland, The Major and the Minor. And that's when he was sick of seeing directors cut pages from his script. It was all about preserving the script. And in fact, that's what Is Diamond, his collaborator, quarter of a century collaborator, and for Some Like It Hot and many, many other films, he would sit like a script supervisor might otherwise do and make sure that those actors utter the lines as they are written on the page. I don't know who this person might be today. It's funny. Is it Arthur Miller's daughter, Rebecca Miller? It's funny. This brings us back then to who's married to oh God, I'm having trouble with names tonight. But with my left foot, God darn it. Anyway, Rebecca Miller's her name. She did a film called Maggie's Plan, which is a screwball, kind of a neo-screwball, which I think has a little bit of the old 30s screwball, whether it's, McCary's The Awful Truth, or whether it's Bringing Up Baby. It has a bit of that, just as Bogdanovich himself tried to do, and I think did quite successfully. With Streisand and God, I'm just having major. This is, thank you. This is like COVID brain. Thank you. What's up, Doc? And let's not forget Madeline Kahn. But so there are ways, and in fact, and Bogdanovich, I mean, may he rest in peace. He was not an easy person, but very, very talented, and interviewed all of these directors. I think he saw himself as carrying the mantle, just as the way that the French New Wave directors saw themselves carrying the mantle of the auteurs that they revered most, whether it was Hitchcock or Ford or Fuller or Omer for that matter. I don't know whether people, I think that the Wes Anderson, whom I mentioned before, go Longhorns, he is very steeped in that, and in fact in that world, and he sees himself, I think, to a certain extent. And I give you just one example, and then you wanted to ask something, and I need to stop forgetting names, but I give you one example, and that's Grand Budapest Hotel. When in Görlitz, where they were shooting on location, he had them watching Shop Around the Corner, Grand Hotel, oh God, what were some of the others? Ninochka. And so I think he wanted them to kind of channel that spirit, so to speak, into Grand Budapest Hotel. And so I think that there is somebody who, whether it's mannered or not, or whether it's contrived or not, I liked Grand Budapest Hotel, I think sees himself sort of in that lineage. I don't know who else. Maybe you have others who came to mind. I liked Rebecca Miller's film, Maggie's Plan. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's with Greta Gerwig, and Julianne Moore plays this Danish postmodern anthropologist who teaches at Columbia. She's hilarious. Everybody loves Zizek. Do you love Zizek? Oh, he really loves Zizek. She has this sort of very funny Danish voice. Anyway, Maggie's Plan. And maybe it's Rebecca Miller. And I believe it is Arthur Miller's daughter, isn't it? I think it is Arthur Miller's daughter. But where am I going? You had a question.
Liz,
I had a quick question. Maybe it's not a quick question.
Liz Waters.
Liz Waters, yeah. I, during COVID, I discovered that film, the TV show, The Five Who Came Back.
Oh, yeah.
And I hadn't realized when I was watching that Billy Wilder had been a journalist.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if you had thought about much of the impact of his journalism on the work that he did during the war.
Well,
the films he made during the war for the government, or I
yeah.
don't know how many of them actually
even a movie like Double Indemnity, which is one of the greatest noirs ever made, I think he's still kind of, he doesn't know where his mom is. He doesn't know where his grandmother is. They've written letters. He couldn't get her out. I think that the sort of the lacuna in that film is that he's kind of coming to grips with what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic, and that dead man walking in Fred McMurray, Walter Neff, the hard-boiled insurance salesman who can't hear his feet, that he in a strange way is that traumatized figure. Yeah. Wilder, he donned the uniform after the war and was not. He went over to supervise on this film, but he did not serve the way that Ford and William Wyler, who was constantly confused for Billy Wilder, who did Best Years of Our Lives and among many other films, and John Huston and George Stevens. Yeah. Mark Harris's book chronicles their service during the Second World War and the way that it impacted them. And there's a Netflix series, 3-part Netflix series of the same name that's really, really worth watching. It's terrific. And the director of that next Netflix series for Amblin Entertainment, for Spielberg's company, got in touch with me. This is one of my biggest letdowns ever. Well, maybe I'm stretching it a little bit, but to do a similar thing for the Casablanca book that I published. I'm like, oh, this is great. I love this, the way that you did that. So didn't happen. Like so many Hollywood dreams, it sort of... Yeah. Like a sandcastle with the surf washing over it, boom, it was gone. But yes, please, Dennis.
In as much as you gave a recent keynote address at the Academy of Motion Picture
Museum, Academy Museum of Motion Pictures, you got it.
Can you tell us something about your current research on Some Like It Hot?
I just spent a couple of memorable days at the Hotel Del. That was fun, getting some wonderful photos in the archive, and I'm hoping to do some work. I wrote to the person who, thanks to the people at the Hotel Del, I was put into to touch with the Coronado Historical Association. I'm hoping to get some eyewitness accounts as well. But the book is like the Casablanca book, is a cultural history of the film, the making, what it means today. But one of the main angles on this film, because, you know, as with Casablanca, this is when I remember when I was a graduate student, I'm writing on Kafka. And what more can one say about Kafka? What more can one say about Casablanca? What more can one say about Some Like It Hot? Well, one of the entry points to the film is going to be going through the early writings of Wilder and really taking very, very seriously these pieces that he wrote as a cub reporter, as a freelancer. Another entry point into the story that I will tell in that book, and I'm getting about to the halfway mark. I tell my editor that. So I'm getting there. But is the story of Barbette, of this Texas-born began as a circus performer, but then was a drag artist in Europe, caught the attention of Cocteau, was photographed for French Vogue in 1926 by Man Ray. Was then there's a poem that Cocteau wrote to Barbette, an ode to Barbette, also cast her then in one of his early experimental films. And so I want to tell the larger story of Barbette, who was born Vanderclyde Broadway in Round Rock, Texas, just outside of Austin, so essentially a suburb of Austin. And so I spent last semester at the Harry Ransom Center as a faculty fellow researching that. And they like the little museum that they have, the Ice House Museum at the Hotel del Coronado here in San Diego. There's a museum it's not in Round Rock, it's in one of the other towns, but they're doing a show on Barbette. So I've benefited from the different curators and in gathering materials, including some wonderful photographs that they have at the Harry Ransom Center, one of which I referenced earlier, which was taken in Vienna by a photographer, very talented woman photographer from Vienna in 1926. And as well as I'm going to use one of the photos from the Vogue shoot with Man Ray. And so I plan to kind of tell a different story about Some Like It Hot, but naturally it will cover some of the same ground. And hopefully will explain to us why it is the all-time greatest American sex comedy. Little bit of hyperbole, right? You know, that's what my PR guy Murray says. You got to always have a little bit of hyperbole. Just a little bit. Wilder seemed to be very attuned to that, by the way, even in some of the passages that I read, I'm sure you may have noticed. Thank you so much for coming here this evening. I really appreciate it. And I will gladly sign any books if that's what you'd like. Dennis has been so generous, and he's got a whole stack of paperbacks of the Casablanca book. He's got more than a stack of the Billy Wilder on Assignment. Still in hardcover. It'll be out in paper in October. But buy it in hardcover. It's nicer, right? Looks better on the shelf. Anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Dennis, for so generously having me here again.